All right, welcome everyone. Um, I have a few sort of housekeeping things I want to share before we get started. This event, I'm sure you noticed, is being recorded. If you would prefer for your camera to be off, you're welcome to keep it off. You're also welcome to change your name to maybe your first name if you would rather not have your name in the recording that will be used. Most likely for a documentary about a Room of Your Own book club. Um, if you're okay with keeping it, please feel free to. And we have the chat open right now, so you can share where you're coming from today, if you would like to. But we will sh close the chat shortly, and then we will have the Q&A open so that people can ask questions there. Um, So I guess I just want to start with a bit of an acknowledgement. Um, Today we're gathered virtually from across many lands, and we honor the Indigenous people who have lived on, cared for, and continue to care for these territories. We recognize the ongoing impacts of colonial violence, which continue to shape the lives and experiences of Indigenous communities, as well as other marginalized groups. And as we reflect on these histories and struggles of oppression, um, we also want to take a moment to remember the women who were lost on December 6th, 1989 at École Polytech, and to hold them in our hearts, along with the many um, missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls, two-spirit, trans, and non-binary people across Turtle Island. So their lives remind us of the urgent work that is needed to end gender-based violence and to create a world where all people are seen, heard, and valued. So we want to invite you now to join us in a moment of silence to honor their lives and the ongoing pursuit for equity and justice. Okay. Um, so if we could make sure the chat gets closed, that would be great. And then I want to start by sort of introducing who we are. So my name is Christine Wildman, and I'm a research and knowledge mobilization specialist with the Neighbors, Friends, and Families campaign, which is a public education campaign that aims to help people recognize the warning signs of intimate partner violence and to provide safety or sorry, to provide safe support to those experiencing violence. And so our lens is through an everyday people lens. So how can we help neighbors, family members, and friends recognize the warning signs, be able to provide like appropriate referrals and talk to people who may be using abusive behaviors. Um, and so I'm going to welcome Tanya Lee to introduce herself and her work. But we've worked with Tanya Lee for a number of years on many different projects now. So Tanya, do you want to talk a little bit about what you do?
Yes, thank you. And thank you, Christine, for that wonderful introduction and for honoring everyone that needs to be honored at this moment. So welcome everyone. I'm Tanya Marie Lee. I'm founder of A Room of Your Own book club. I am a lover of libraries, as everyone knows, and everything magical that a book holds and brings into this world. So I'm glad that you are all here with us today. Um, Consider this your safe space to feel loved, respected, and celebrated for exactly who you are. You matter, your identity matters, your culture matters, and your history matters. Welcome home. And that has always been the motto of A Room of Your Own book club.
Thank you. Um, So I'll just talk a little bit now about how sort of the layout of the event. So the power of the page, who gets seen and heard, is a virtual panel on representation and gender diversity in authorship and publishing. And the discussion aims to examine whose voices are uplifted, whose are excluded, and how that shapes what sort of young readers see, imagine, and believe is possible in their lives. And so we will hear today from writers, a publisher, a librarian, um, and a book club founder through readings and a panel discussion as well as an audience Q&A. And so we're going to start with introductions with our panelists, and then we'll move into sort of a moderated panel discussion and then a Q&A provided we have time. So I'll hand it over to you, Tanya.
Thank you. Okay, so the first person that we're going to hear from today is Rick. So the floor is yours, Rick, so to speak.
All righty. Thanks. Thanks so much. And congratulations. I think this is such an essential conversation, and I'm honored to be a part of it. So thank you a lot. Uh, I am the co-founder and current co-publisher of Anik Press Limited, Canadian publisher for children's and youth. I'm going to race through this part because I want to set up my remarks. Our mission is to publish books that reflect the world of the contemporary child and make sure that all people and communities are seen and heard in our books. But I want to talk about one particular aspect of and introduce one particular aspect of our mandate, and that is, and it's a lot of discussion in the companies, whose story gets told, why that's important, and how that's connected to the deep significance of reading and representation. So let me begin by talking about reading and the inherent power it has. Enough with the studies. There's so much we know and we can quantify. And very quickly, we know that readers do better academically. We know that they have higher levels of empathy. In other words, there is less othering. We know that they do better with social, emotional learning. And I could go on, but my very favorite is readers show much higher levels of critical and analytical thinking. And if we think that's not critical, just have a look at the world around us today, right? What happened to that? But there's a but. There are actual several buts in terms of what's going on from a publisher's perspective. So a lot of recent studies have shown that in the States, and Canada is not far behind, reading for pleasure has dropped by about 40% over the last couple of decades, and that's pretty bad. The same percentages exist for youth. And we know that with kids, if we don't capture them by the age of 8, the chances of them becoming lifelong readers really decline. So this decline in reading for pleasure is really serious. I think it's a deeply serious problem, especially as it appears that reading for pleasure also correlates with socioeconomic background. So this drop will negatively affect the chances of many kids and have an impact on who and what voices are heard. And this leads to a kind of double whammy of sorts. It's not just that reading levels have dropped, discouraging enough, but what we're reading is being seriously challenged, and whose voices we hear is getting challenged too often. So that's a lead into the remarks that I'll have later on, but I wanted to set it up with those comments.
Thank you. Thank you, Rick. And next we'll hear from Melanie Florence, author of Stolen Words, one of my favorite picture books.
Hi. I don't know what to say other than my name's Melanie Florence, and I'm an author of picture books, middle grade and YA, and the book that Tanya mentioned is Stolen Words that many people seem to have heard of. And I have historically written a lot of Indigenous content with Indigenous characters, Indigenous issues. and then pivoted a little bit towards writing, I guess, stories that are just stories as opposed to issue driven books. Um, because I think Indigenous stories encompasses a lot more than what I had initially been writing. So I wanted to write experiences that were maybe a little more broad than what I initially started writing. So I kind of run the gamut of what I write, but yeah, I don't know what else I can say.
Oh, that's perfect. Thank you, Melanie. And the next person we're going to hear from is Larissa Essex. I met Larissa through the book club when we held it at Lillian H. Smith Public Library in Toronto, and she is just such a beautiful soul.
Well, thank you for that, Tanya. Wow, that's a lot to live up to. Hello, everyone. I am Larissa Essex. I am currently the Children's Services Coordinator for the Midland Public Library up on the lovely shores of Georgian Bay. But formerly, I was a librarian at Toronto Public Library. As Tanya mentioned, that is where we met back in 2016 when the book club first started. And this lovely, wonderful personality came up, bouncing up to me and said, "Hey, I've got this great thing, and we would love to partner with the libraries." Um, Tanya, as she mentioned, and I'm sure we'll mention again and again, has been a huge lover of libraries her whole life and a huge, huge supporter. It was just a fantastic fit, and it absolutely fit with our mandate. And she had this wonderful idea for this book club that was centered around young women. That was a safe space for them where they could express their feelings and know that they weren't being judged by anything they were saying, and also bringing in authors that represented their world. As we all know, a lot of young people and a lot of people from different cultures, a lot of young women don't see themselves in the literature. So Tanya's mandate was really to get those voices heard and bring them to the forefront, bring in the authors who were our celebrities in library land. We love our authors. They're all our celebrities. And it was just so wonderful for these young women to be able to come and connect and hear stories that reflected their voices and their experiences, and something that a lot of them had never seen before. Um, yeah, I guess that's all I really have to say. I'm really looking forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Larissa. And next we'll hear from Trin Delaney, author of A House Unsettled.
Hi everyone. I'm so happy to be here. I'm Trin. I wrote the book that Tanya just mentioned, A House Unsettled, and I am also like an adult author as well as a children's author. And my books tend to focus on perspectives that I didn't see growing up that I that I wanted to see as someone who's mixed race Black from the East Coast and queer and trans. I was always looking for like things that made me feel connected to that, and I managed to find that through my local libraries. So I'm really, really grateful for everything that those libraries have done, and interlibrary loans, especially in rural contexts, are so important for that. And yeah, I'm just happy to be here with everyone, and the kids who participated in the book club that I was invited to were just so amazing. And so I feel so lucky to have been able to interact with them. And this is just such a special space. So yeah.
And remember when they guessed all your questions? All the questions that I asked, I said, "Hey, what would Trin, which answer would she choose?" They all choose the correct answer.
Yeah.
That was a lot of fun. And next, we have S.K. Ali, author of Love from A to Z. So, and I believe Sajida is going to be doing an author reading from her new book.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me here. So next year will be my 10th year in the industry, and visiting the book club that Tanya invited me to a few times has been among my highlights of my publishing career. Just interacting with those readers, and just being able to tell them, yeah, I've been there, you know. I was living at the library like you, and just getting them to like um engage with each other and engaging with them with stories was an amazing experience. And I thank you, Tanya, for doing the work you do. So I was asking Tanya if this is the time that is this okay to read? Okay, so I'm an author of YA novels, picture books, and middle grade. And for I wanted to share a little from my newest novel that came out last year. It's the first of a duology, dystopian duology, and the second part's coming out next year. So I'm just going to read a little bit, just to kind of, capture the topic of what we're speaking about as well. And the story follows six POVs. So this is Nada's POV, and it's a record of her dreaming. Nada of Lower Earth, a record of dreaming and memories and a love so perfect. One thing all of humanity has in common, nobody asked to be born into their specific lives. Nina Nushba poured tea for 11-year-old Musaid and then for 10-year-old Nada. This ritual had begun to bother Nada. Musaid hadn't been a guest at the palace for 2 years now. He was a resident, but Nina Nushba always treated him like an honored one, giving him his tea and cookies first at their daily tea time before her. It used to be only her and Nina Nushba. We, each of us, didn't ask to be born into the circumstances of our lives, Nina Nushba continued, lifting her cup shaped like an orange peony up to her lips as she repeated her intro to their conversation today. When you think about that carefully and you think, what if I'd been born underground? What if I'd been born in the sky and upper earth? You can always find a little something in your heart to extend to others. I was born underground, Nada blurted, her eyes growing wide the second she realized what she had said. Nina Nushba lowered her cup. And who told you that? Mosaic cocked his head, a perplexed expression on his brow. Nada felt emboldened, the slight envy that struck her sometimes when Nina Nushba showed extra love to Maisaid, now pushing her sails. Mama told me. I mean, she wrote it for me. The other story's a lie. And this was the part of the dream when Nina Nushba's face grew long, her mouth puckered, eyes widening to see as much into Nada's soul as she could. Before she spoke again, she drew in a breath, dramatic in its articulation of her pent-up disappointment of Nada. Are you the one who stole the scroll in my dressing cabinet? Are you the one who can't let good things be? Are you the one who has to poke and poke until you find a leak? Now there was nowhere to hide, so Nada did what she always did in this part of the dream. She flipped the table and sent the tea service clattering down, exploding their tea time decorum, encouraging shock from her beloved grandmother and her beloved Musaid, so calm and collected and content always, such wrinkly-eyed, smiley people. In reality, this was the actual way unfolded back then. She sat there silent, without blurting anything, with brows so visibly seething under the dark bangs she'd continued to wear high. She'd sat there until Mosaid left for his driving lessons, his chosen apprenticeship after after Nina had suggested he take one. Then Nada asked her grandmother why Mosaid always got his tea and cookies first when he actually lived on the palace grounds now. He's not a guest anymore, Nina, because everywhere else in the world, he gets his tea served last. Because, like I was saying, of the circumstances he's born into, as though he's a rat born underground with the imprint tattoo in the corner of his eye, letting everyone know he's always meant to be hidden, to be unseen. Nina Nushba lowered her cup and spoke in that gentle, measured way that told the girl that an important lesson was coming. Be careful to always monitor your feelings, as only humility leads to truth. Arrogance leads to lies. That's how we get destroyed from within as a person and as a nation. Nada nodded at this explanation, a little bubble of pride and love ballooning inside for Nina Nushba, who was always so fair, and her heart softened for Musaid, which made her gaze at him from then on with newly found respect. If he still smiled through being treated so badly by the world, he had a mysterious ability she wanted to know more about. But as the truth of her own life sank slowly into her consciousness years later, that conversation at tea time began haunting her as she fell asleep. It appeared to her again and again as a rearranged tableau to drive home another truth. The reality of that tea time and every other one with Nina Nushba hadn't been fully honest. Looking back, she wished at that moment she had said, "But Nina, I was born to be hidden too. My life is also at the mercy of others. Like you said, we don't ask to be born into circumstance of our lives. Arinas to be born a hated, hunted princess.
Oh, that was beautiful. Thank you, Sajida. And next we will hear from Igraziani, author of Breaking Faith. Thank you.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for having me, Tanya. It's always a pleasure to see you. I just want to say I recognize so many authors that are here today, and I purchased every one of your books from my libraries. I'm a teacher librarian. I'm retired now, but Rick, what you said was so important about getting kids early and having them, appreciate reading just for the sake of reading. Okay, so my main character, and I want to say Tanya as well. When talking to your girls at the library, they were so engaged and beautiful. They're beautiful people, and I was honored. I was honored by their insight into the novel. So I just wanted to go there and say that. Okay, anyway. Uh, my main character, Faith, was inspired to tell her story by her counselor. And I was inspired to tell Faith's story because as a teacher, before I became teacher librarian, I taught in what our board um, designated an equal opportunity school. And there were many children in that school who had a rough start in their life. Um, and I just felt such empathy for them. And sometimes it's not a matter of being a teacher. Sometimes you just need to be there for them in a capacity where you're just a caring adult. So my main character, Faith, is based on a whole bunch of kids that I taught. Um, Sometimes the hardest part of telling your story, Faith said, is believing it's worth hearing. The truth doesn't vanish just because we hide from it. It waits until we're brave enough to give it words. As writers, I'm honored to be here with you because we come together today to honor that bravery, to honor the courage to write what matters, and to face what's hard and to share our truths so others can see themselves in our words. I just want to read a little excerpt from, and this is the book, Breaking Faith. It's kind of blurry because I have uh, my screen on blur. So I wanted to add a few words before the novel actually started. This novel is not only about a runaway teen on drugs, it's about the suffering, bullying, and trauma that the protagonist Faith has lived through and why she is the way she is. Only in becoming aware of the baggage that some of us carry upon our shoulders can we begin to understand why we do the things we do. Hopefully, Faith's story will help us to see beyond the weirdness, as she calls it, and to treat our troubled peers with kindness and understanding. So I'm trying to reach out to youth and to put them in Faith's shoes so that they can see, so that they can have a little bit more empathy in terms of their peers. And just a few words from Faith. I always knew I was different, and I'm not just referring to the family structure in which I was raised. I mean, my mind worked differently. At home, I would cry a lot because I felt misjudged and misunderstood. And at school, I was a riddle to adults and other kids alike, just as I was a riddle to myself. Even with sporadic counseling, I was still weird. I would blame it on me, but now I know better. And now, as I take strides to maybe someday make the world a better place for me, I realize that no human being, no matter how tattered physically and emotionally, how weary of mind and shattered in soul, is unworthy of our consideration. In my heart, at times, when the pendulum swings low, I'm still out there, shivering right along with them. And that's it.
Thank you, Edie. And I've always loved that book. Oh my gosh, I've always loved it. And so next we're going to hear from Shelley Page. And let me tell you, she was the editor and she brought all these stories together in Night of the Living Queers. And I waited and waited and waited for this book to come out. I was so excited. So take the floor, Shelley.
Thank you so much. And thank you for having me here. It is great to chat with you again. It's been a minute. So I'm Shelley Page. I am the editor of Night of Living Queers, which I have right here. I don't know if you can see that. My screen is blurred. And I also am a YA author of Brood of Love, which was selected as the New York Public Library's, one of the New York Public Library's best books of 2025, and the forthcoming Charmed and Dangerous. By day, I am an attorney, and I write at night, and I identify as a Black lesbian, and all of my characters are Black lesbians. My inspiration for editing the anthology Night of the Living Queers was because I noticed that there was a severe lack of BIPOC, particularly queer BIPOC authors represented in horror. And so I thought, let's do an anthology, and was able to gather a lot of YA authors together, and we had this anthology come out in 2023. And I was able to speak at the book club, Room of Your Own, and it was just so fantastic. The students asked so many great questions. So I am pleased to be here. Thank you.
Thank you, Shelley. And next, we're going to hear from Maggie DeVries. And Maggie was one of the first authors at Neighbors, Family, and Friends. Christine, can you say it all together? The organization name. Your organization.
Neighbors,
Yeah.
neighbors, friends, and families.
Neighbors, friends, and families. Okay, so Maggie DeVries was one of the first to speak there, and we had her book club, and I was blown away by Maggie, and I'm so honored to have her here again today.
Thank you so much, Tanya. It was an amazing experience. I think it was, well, I know it was in December 2017, and we took the train together, didn't we, to London? Yeah, and stayed overnight and all kinds of things. I mean, it was wonderful. The participants, the young people were amazing. Um, I this is the book that I wrote before the book that I read from it in 2017, Rabbit Ears. I've written for children, I've written for teens, and my sister was had many troubles, and she ended up living on the downtown east side, and she was a drug user, and she was addicted to, and she was a sex worker. And she disappeared in 1998. She was murdered, as it turned out, and she's one of Vancouver's missing and murdered Indigenous women. And she was a writer. She left lots of writing behind. And I learned so much in the years after she disappeared about her life and the lives of women like her. So I wrote a memoir that incorporates a lot of her writing, which was a way of getting her writing to people because she was really a brilliant writer. And then later, I wrote Rabbit Ears, which is fiction, because I learned that Sarah had been abused as a child, which we didn't know. And I wanted to write a story where these things happened and the character didn't die. But I ended up incorporating the real Sarah into the book. And I'd like to just read a little short section. My young character, Kaya, has been going downtown to the downtown east side in Vancouver. And she goes to the house where Sarah lived because she hasn't seen Sarah in a while. You duck and weave round the house, through the bean plants, and climb the steps. This time you don't hesitate. You bang away with all your strength. Charlie, you call out. He comes. The door opens. He looks at you. Aren't you supposed to be in jail, he says, but not in a mean way. Where's Sarah, you ask, your voice sharp. He stares for a moment, and his crumbly body crumbles a little more.
Where is she? You say again, softening your expression and your voice. I don't know, he says. A lot of people have been asking. The police were even here last week. He pauses. Took them long enough. How long's it been, you ask, reaching up to wipe a sudden sheet of sweat off your forehead. Couple months, he replies. He seems to take pity on you. Come on in, he says. I want to show you. You find yourself in the battered living room where some guy is on the nod on the couch with that same scrawny kitten, now larger and scrawnier, curled up on his back. In front of you is a door with an open padlock hanging off it. Sarah's room, where you slept that one night. Charlie opens the door and ushers you in. I showed the cop, he says, but he wasn't all that interested. The room is a mess, jammed with stuff, clothes mixed with junk. They are shoved onto shelves, heaped on the bed, the floor. A closet at the end of the room stands mostly empty. I don't know what to do with all this, he says. It doesn't sound as if he's annoyed. He sounds kind of lost. Listen, do you think there's anything here you might like? Dread, black and bitter, floods your belly. You know it's naive, but you say, it's hers. She'll want it when she gets back. He stares at the wall and nods slowly. Well, yes. You know what he's thinking, and you kind of know he's right. Thank you.
Thank you, Maggie. And then the last person to speak is me. And I just, I
Sorry,
think everyone
Tanya, can I
here.
just interrupt for a second because Barb is here. So if you want,
Oh,
yeah.
Barb. Okay, hi, Barb.
Hi. Hi.
Hi.
Hi.
Oh, hello, Barb. Everyone, this is Barb. I've known Barb for so long, Barb McQuarrie, and we started the book club um, with Maggie DeVries because of Barb. So thank you, Barb. Tell us what you want to say about everything.
Well, first of all, I just want to say that thank you for pulling this together. Thank you for opening this discussion. I think that the book club was one of the best things that we did at the center. I love being able to think about and talk about really, really important social issues for girls and young women through literature. One of the things that most surprised me was how difficult it was to get access to schools. I thought that this, I thought this would be such a attractive option for them to have students talking about literature and exploring really critical social themes with experts and with authors. And there was so much gatekeeping. There was really a lot of gatekeeping. There was really a firmly held belief that we might damage students by even introducing some of these issues to them. And there was so much dissonance to me, from that opinion. And Maggie, you just talked about your sister, who is the same age as some of these students who weren't even allowed to hear about these issues. And so I do think we need to be sensitive in the way we talk to students about this, but I don't think it helps anybody to hide social issues, to pretend that they don't exist, to to think that we can build bubbles around certain groups of more privileged students and only have, those issues for the rest. I think that is such a unethical and just wrong-headed way of looking at things. So I just respect so much all of the authors, Tanya, you, all the work that you've done, Larissa. I know you've been there a lot with Tanya too. It's such important work, and I think it's the right vehicle for broadening our understanding and our empathy.
Thank you, Barb. That was so beautifully said. And I'm so happy to see you. I'll just talk briefly about myself because we have to watch the time. I created a Room of Your Own book club because I wanted to create a safe space for young girls and for all their allies. So I never excluded anybody. Young men were allowed to attend, but they were told that they were there to support their peers. And they did come out and they did support their peers. One of my major goals was for girls to see themselves represented in the novels by kick-ass protagonists that look like them, plus meet the amazing authors writing these novels for them. So look at all these amazing authors. Why wouldn't I want to create something like this? Look at all the women you just spoke with. They're role models for all these young women and their allies and students, however they identify. So I was honored that when most of the authors said yes, and I was refused by many authors. I have to admit that. It shocked me, but I was refused by many authors. And I wanted each student who attended the book club in person, and I wanted to recognize that they are beautiful souls and in this world, and that they deserve to be treated with dignity and respect. And most importantly, I wanted them to feel valued and loved, because I know a lot of them didn't feel that way. And I know a lot of them weren't treated with dignity and respect because they were treated as the other. And I wanted them to know that in this space, you're not the other. And you deserve to be here. So thank you. And we will go now into the panel discussion. So get ready, everybody, for some delicious topic discussions. So our first one is representation and visibility. Why does representation matter? Who is seen and heard in publishing today, and whose stories are still missing or overlooked? And this is for the panel to discuss. And if we have time, how does your lived experiences shape what and how you write? So please feel free to turn on your mics and start the discussion. Rick, come on.
All right. All right. Well, can I start by just throwing out some remarks that I jotted down and take a few minutes to do that? And if that doesn't provoke anybody, I'm in the wrong crowd, but I'm sure it will. And I promise to be more upbeat in the last section of this. So when I was reflecting on this, I thought I'm going to be the bringer of good news and actually some pretty discouraging news too. Because when we talk about representation, historically, there's been a problem in the publishing industry. And I should start with there. This has been predominantly a white industry publishing white writers, and we've got the data to prove it. So even up to the early 2000s, books featuring Black, Indigenous, and other people of color were a small minority, actually in single digits in a percentage. And I will mention too that the workforce in the publishing industry was overwhelmingly white, 70 to 80%, right up to the mid 2010s. And we had endless discussions in our company about how books for youth should look like the classrooms that kids are in. So there's a lot of discussion about the need for some kind of rebalancing, some kind of deep rethinking, and it was great that that happened. There was a "we need diverse books" movement, and the result was, and this is the good news piece, by 2020 the trend was, to throw numbers at you, 46 to 49% of books published did have significant BIPOC content, and by 2014 it was up to 51%. Unfortunately, in the publishing industry itself, there were only modest changes. And I know many companies like ours are working to change that, and we have changed it, but it's still a process. I got tons of stuff to say here. Let me just skip through, though. I do want to just actually, as a footnote, say that the question of quality and authenticity remains, and this is something to think about, because in spite of the increased counts of diverse books, it doesn't automatically mean authentic or own voice representation in too many cases, nor do they guarantee that diverse creators are being hired, promoted, and paid equitably. So there is that to really take into account. I'm worried now, however, that there's been some slip back. Here's where the United States and Canada have slightly different stories to tell. In the US, over a period of time, the right wing has been very smart about taking over school and library boards. And man, do we see the impact. It's terrible. I'm going to say a bit more about that in a second. To some extent, it's happening in Canada too. We aren't off the hook. There are things to worry about. But I'll just leave it and say that generally, as DEI comes under threat, library budgets are under attack in many places, and there are restrictions in too many classrooms. Um, there's also the issue of book bannings. I absolutely must mention that. It is so dead easy to get banned these days. I don't think a week goes by that, a progressive publisher like us doesn't suffer from bannings. And there are other forms of banning happening too that people need to be aware of. One is shadow banning, where a book is not actually banned, it's just not available. So if you want the book, you actually have to ask somebody to get it. This happened in the Forest of Reading a couple of years ago, and there was a huge public outcry. The books that get most frequently banned are the LGBTQ 2S plus books, as people here will attest, and really just voices from marginalized communities. It doesn't take a lot. And I want to say that the essential point is that all this kind of control of reading is about books, but it also isn't about It's books. It's really about banning people and ideas, and that's where it costs society just so much. Um, I could go into the story in Alberta. I'm not going to. What I'd like to do is just say, maybe cite a couple of examples and say that ANIC, as a vision-driven company, we don't back down from this stuff. If we get banned, we fight it. There are a lot of ways to fight it, and we're doubling down, and we're certainly not compromising in our publishing program. But I want to give you two really quick examples, if I can. One book that has been attacked, and particularly in the States, but in Canada too, it's been a problem, is by a writer named Kobe Dill, a sound poet, and his book is called Stay Up: Racism, Resistance, and Reclaiming Black Freedom. It's a nonfiction book for young adults. And I'm going to do what I don't like to do, and that's actually read the author's words, because Kobe is so eloquent, and I think he makes some really important points. He says, racism is a real and present danger, but how can you fight it if you don't know how it works or where it comes from? That's what the book is about. And he says, whether young people are experiencing marginalization or not, learning about how systemic oppression works is the key for both personal well-being and a healthy society. Understanding how certain groups either benefit from or experience disadvantage as a result of oppression allows young people to either understand the social obstacles they may be facing, which are often invisible, or to see the impact of their own privilege and take responsibility for confronting and ending unjust systems. For young people who do face racism and other forms of oppression, understanding how complex systems works helps prevent serious mental health problems whose root may lie in their experiences with oppression. So that's a book that gets banned, right? I think it's a model of how it doesn't take much. And another from the other category that gets banned, books with queer characters. We had a picture book called Selma Writes a Book, banned by Danny Ramadan. And he said just simply, it's truly heartbreaking to me that there are children in the school system who may never know that I wrote this book for them, says Ramadan. It's a personal, meaningful, and truly joyful story. As a queer immigrant who came to Canada seeking refuge and escaping homophobia, it breaks my heart to see my book limited in such a way. My heart aches for my book and its potential readers, and I can only really echo that. Um, yeah, I could go on. I was talking to a wholesaler yesterday. A wholesaler are the companies, wholesalers who supply books to school libraries. And they said, and this is here in Canada, they've had some libraries who say, send us the book list, send us the books, but none, please, with queer or gay themes in it. We just can't deal with it. So there's an issue here. And I'll throw that out for conversation, see what it sparked, but that's our experience, and it's certainly an ongoing fight at Anik Press.
Okay, who else on the panel would like to add to that?
I can add to that actually, because that rings true for me, certainly. I had my first nomination for Forest of Reading, and the book got shadow banned in one of the Catholic school boards. And I found out because somebody else found out and told me, and I tried to contact them, and just the reasoning behind it was ridiculous. It was a book that addressed racism. Um, and it was a book that really talked about stereotypes and how, you know, just a kid who is racist and learning how not to be. And it was, I mean, that's what the book was about. But I don't think they read it. They just saw that the word Indian was in it and decided we're not going to carry this. And as such, the book got shadow banned. So I think this was a book that maybe could have shared a message of anti racism. But because they must have done a scan for keywords without actually reading the book and finding out what it was about, it got pulled from consideration in an entire school board. And I think probably more of, funny enough, I've got a grade book coming out that I kind of spoke with my own experience growing up and with my daughter's experience. So it's about a bisexual 12-year-old. And it's going to get banned. Like, I know for a fact that there are some libraries that will not carry it. And there are not, at least when I was looking for books for my daughter, certainly there weren't any when I was growing up, but for my daughter, I couldn't find a lot of books that addressed, girls at this age kind of realizing that they're bi. So I wrote one, and I do feel like what Rick is saying, that there are people who will just flag it immediately and not, it won't get carried. So I'm sorry, that was kind of all over the place, but I'm sure there are authors on the panel that have dealt with similar issues.
Why don't we just come together and just hold that book club, host it, and then we'll teach them.
I can
Sorry.
sorry. Go ahead,
No,
Melanie.
please go ahead, Lorraine.
I was just going to say, I can actually add something from the public library perspective. Back when I was with Toronto Public Library, this was when Robin Stevenson's book Pride was up for Forest of Reading, and Robin was coming into town, and we arranged for Robin to come in and do an author visit. So I had actually two of our local schools scheduled to bring their classes in, and this was the public school board. So the Toronto District School Board, the public board, and I think I had 3 or 4 classes that were going to bring their students in. And about a week before, they said, we've had some, backlash from, not from parents or anything, from the principal of the school. And they're not certain that we should be bringing, our group over to the library for this program. So we worked out, said, well, what if, we sent a form home, just a sign off from the parents signing off saying their kid can come. And if they don't want their child to attend, that's on the parent and they can stay at the school. And it was totally vetoed by the principal, and they kiboshed the whole thing. And we were not allowed to, we ended up with 0 people in attendance for Robin Stevenson, for a Forest of Reading author. And it was just so disastrous. We held it anyway, and we opened. So what we did in the library was we still had Robin come in, and we announced it to everyone that was in the library. So we just sort of pulled people who were already in the branch and said, come on, we have this amazing, wonderful author who's come from BC to Toronto specifically for this festival. And would you like to come? So we did manage to gather up a few people, and the people that did come had really wonderful questions, and it turned out to be a great visit. But it was like 5 people when we had 3 or 4 classes scheduled from the public school board too.
Larissa, I saw Robin on that trip. I remember that happening because we had coffee on that trip.
And I wasn't the only school.
No,
The
there
only
was
library.
another issue,
There were
and I'm
others, yeah.
speaking for Robin again, but Larissa, you probably heard about this, that she had, I think it was the principal on the day of, when she was in the school, come up to her and say, and it was when she was doing that book about notable people. I forget which book it was, but they came up to her and specifically told her not to talk about one of the people in the book because that person was gay. And it was literally the day of, and they came up to her and told her not to talk about it. And this just angers me so much.
I know.
I mean,
so
I'm sorry
much.
I threw in there, but
No, that's fine. I appreciate the perspective, but yeah. And I mean, for any of you who know Robin is just amazing.
Can I just jump in here as a teacher librarian? in a Catholic board. We want everyone to know that we are fighting for you. We have, we, back when I was working for the Catholic board, the Hamilton, um, and I'm going to say in their defense, they never, they never come out and say, we don't want this and be careful of this. They never do. There are times when we have to deal with parents and principals. Really, it's not like, they don't offer any, they don't step in and intervene unless a parent comes forward and complains. Okay. But as teacher librarians, we fight for you, we fight for everyone. And we just want you to know that we're not the gatekeepers. We want to bring diverse literature to our students because we know that our classrooms aren't the same as they were 30, 40 years ago, even 20 years ago. And, it's all a part of welcoming. It's all a part of having students know that they are included. So authors, keep them coming because if you stop writing them, they win.
Can I just quickly support
Oh,
that? Sorry, somebody else wanted to speak. That's fine. I've had my chance.
listening to all of you is making me remember an experience that I had that's a little bit off to the side of this, but relevant, I think. With when I wrote Rabbit Ears, there was a book club. I hope it's still running in Vancouver, where it's with there's different levels, children, teens, and parents come too, and they read books together, and they read books from when they're children up till they're 18. So this can go on, and they workshop authors' work too. So I was able to bring a manuscript of Rabbit Ears and have it handed out to tween, I guess, 12, 13, 14-year-olds to take away and read in manuscript form and then come and give me feedback on the manuscript, which was hugely helpful to me and terrifying, absolutely terrifying to me. And it was very interesting. The parents then had this manuscript that their kid had brought home, and they're reading it, and it has various things in it, like there's oral sex in it, there's sex work, there's 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 all terrible things happen in it, there's abuse, and the parents were quite shocked. But there's one thing I wanted to say is when we were all together that evening discussing it, what it dawned on me as I was watching the conversations around the room and listening to the feedback, the parents thought that their children were being exposed to these ideas for the very first time in that manuscript. They had no idea that their children knew what oral sex was. 12, 13-year-old children, they thought they were, so it was a revelation to the parents right there in the room in front of me that no, they already knew about that before. So I think that's where a lot of these barriers spring from, is somehow parents think that their children know nothing about anything until we expose them to it in our terrible, horrible books that we write. So I just thought I would mention that experience.
Could I just say briefly that I think, listening to all of you, what I'm thinking about is the importance of allies. I'm not a teacher, I'm not a writer, but we managed to start the book club despite lots of resistance and lots of concerns and lots of fears. And not because I'm a hero, because maybe I'm a bit stubborn, but also because I had allies who helped me to convince the people in the school that were making decisions. And so, Edie, you need people behind you. I believe that you're fighting. I thank you for that. You can't do it on your own. And so I think I don't know who all of you are here, but from where you stand, be an ally. Talk to teachers, talk to principals, talk to school boards, talk to other students about why literature is such a good vehicle for being able to understand, discuss, explore these issues.
Can I just say quickly, Barb? Very well said. Well, everybody, very, very well said. And as a publisher, and I know speaking on behalf of our writers, we have great allies. And first and foremost, they are called librarians. The library community is fantastic. The teaching community is great. You know, no one understands the fight for freedom to read more than librarians do. And it's totally heartening. It's totally a good news story. And I congratulate the writers on this panel too, who aren't afraid to tell what are difficult stories for many people in society. And I quickly want to add that in speaking with the Ontario Library Association about this, about where banning comes from, who's behind it, it's from a conservative mindset by and large, right? And for the kind of reasons that have been cited here. So it's not appropriate to look at any particular school board or any denomination. It comes from all over the place. It just takes a handful of conservative people within a community to start raising these issues and ringing alarm bells, and it picks up its own momentum. But thank goodness there's librarians on our side.
Can I also add, um, as a member of the Muslim community, a visible member of the Muslim community, there's also ideas of otherness and um, like who gets to be seen. And and part of the questions for this panel is like who gets to be seen. But I also want to say, I want to talk about who gets to be seen how. Because I grew up seeing Muslims only as it was, I don't call it misrepresented, call it malrepresented because it was deliberately negative. We were always, the like the villains, and it was, I've never seen a positive representation of a Muslim ever growing up, and especially women. Um, and so, I think there's also that besides the conservative right wing ban, ideas community, there's also institutionalization of otherness because it serves a greater, you know, uh, purpose on a world stage as well. Like Canada, whether we like to admit it or not, is as complicit in a lot of, what's going on around the world. And so there is that as well, like that continuous propping up of like, suspicion about certain communities. So I grew up with that, and I had to like decide when I became published that because growing up we were always told in our communities, you know, write the truth, set the record straight. That's not who we are. And in the beginning I was doing that, and then I had to shift and say, no, I want to write the stories I want to write, just like Melanie brought up, you know, not writing just for to sort of like with messages, but to say, because when we address what has been spoken about our communities and that becomes our mission, we're keeping that circulating, and that becomes that's the agenda again, as opposed to saying, well, what are the stories that I want to talk about? Like I want the reason I wrote my first debut novel, my debut novel was Saints and Misfits, about a girl speaking up and finding her voice to call out her attacker, is a Me Too novel, is because that's what I wanted to look at. And it wasn't about, writing and, just writing the record on Muslims, but it was like, let me look at this topic that I care about. So I had to shift, like Melanie did, into that and view. And yeah, so I do want to recognize that besides um, these movements to repress, um, and not just like Rick said, it's not just about banning this book or that book. It's really about banning individuals and people. Um, and but there's also another institutionalized view of certain communities that I've dealt with, and especially in Canada, I would say it's very part of the institutions here.
Thank you. We're going to move on to the next round, the next questions. But I also just wanted to add one little tiny thing, and I wanted to say this. So, when all of these wonderful authors showed up for the book club, A Room of Your Own, I just wanted to say that you broke down barriers. You did. And so, and I remember from Sajida SKLE's book club when she did Saints and Misfits, how one young woman, they kept on asking, is she going to be wearing a job? Is she going to wearing a job? Is she going to come in wearing a job? And then when they saw her wearing a hijab, they were like, yay, 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 she's wearing a hijab. And then I remember Sajida talking to me after that book club, because every student got, before the pandemic, got to sign, got their book signed, and had their special moment with each author. Um, and and I remember Sajida saying that one of the students came up to her and said, this is the first time that she's ever seen a Muslim girl portrayed in a positive light. And that was the whole purpose of the book club. It was breaking down barriers. So, and that leads us into the next question, barriers, opportunities, and inclusion. What are some key barriers and opportunities in authorship and publishing? And what does meaningful inclusion look like? So whoever wants to lead first. We
Can I,
haven't heard
can
from
I,
Shelley and Trin. We haven't heard from you.
can I just say something quickly about that? Just this one thing, because I see there's wonderful librarians here and educators. One thing that I do think is a barrier is when the idea that books, and I mean, Rick, you touched upon this, many others have touched upon this, the idea that books by marginalized authors are only for marginalized communities. That's a huge barrier because and I'll like when I go to library conventions, when I go to these conventions where I'm interfacing with people who deal with books and students and readers, I often people come up to me and say, I got your book because I have a lot of Muslim students in my school. And I say, thank you, but then I think, but you should get the book even if there isn't, because I grew up reading a lot of diverse authors, and I found my connections to different communities through that. So I found allyship, like we were talking about, and I felt connections through reading those experiences. And I think that's a barrier when we think it only should be for the communities. It should be for everyone.
SK, I just want to say I totally agree with you on that. And it's one of the reasons why I think that kids need to be exposed to all kinds of books, because through reading and through experiencing it, I think they develop a kind of empathy, right, towards other, towards groups that may not be, what they're used to. So uh, I hear you, and that's absolutely true. Great point.
No, I absolutely agree with that as well, working in the public library. So obviously coming from Toronto, which is very multicultural and has many people from many different walks of life, and then moving to sort of rural Ontario, where it is very white, and that is very obvious. One of the first things I did when I came here was I did a diversity audit on our collection and made sure that even if these individuals were not represented within our community, they were still represented within the public library system, and that people still had access to these materials to ensure that people were getting those differing viewpoints and having access to those materials as well.
Any further comments?
I I'm kind of okay. Let me say this, that we were talking about barriers, and I am happy to see that there are many more, just speaking of my own lane here, many more Indigenous, many more diverse storytellers being published than there were 10 years ago, even 5 years ago. We see more stories out there. However, there's still, okay, so there was a book festival that had a tent that was specifically listed as being a Turtle Island story tent. And it was disheartening to me that one of the authors that they featured was a white author telling an Indigenous story. But there were so many Indigenous picture books that were released this year. And I'm not speaking of, I didn't have an Indigenous picture book this year. So, but when you look, there were so many, and they were left out of an experience that should have been centered on them. And instead, it was given to somebody telling a not my own voices story in a tent that should have been exclusively given to people telling their stories. And the number of people that I felt could have had that opportunity and didn't was very disheartening to me. So I'll just kind of
Yeah,
leave it at that, and
Melanie,
maybe other people want to weigh in.
that is wrong on so many levels.
Yeah, yeah.
I
And
yeah, that should not have happened.
the fact that uh, I don't even know what else to say. It's something that I'm trying to like smile through this, but it upsets me so much that there are opportunities being taken away from people, you know, in all of our experiences. I think that anyway, I'll let somebody else weigh in on that or their own story.
Um, I on this topic, it's my experience is really mixed because I was drawn to write these two books that I've mentioned because of wanting to share experiences and voices that have been excluded and for whom there's barriers. My sister's writing was buried in journals and shared with very few people until I put it in Missing Sarah and Rabbit Ears. I was sharing her story and her sister's story, who was based on me. Sarah was Black and Indigenous, and as I mentioned, a sex worker. And those are, so I was, but I was in between her and the people reading her voice. And I'm a white writer. And I think that it's been much easier for me to have access to the publishing world and readers because of being white. And there's such a terrible irony there that my whiteness has made that avenue easier. And in doing so, that is shutting out other people's voices. So I think I see my sister had well, she has it. Her daughter is 34 years old, and she is a writer and a speaker, and she's very involved in um, with issues around missing and murdered Indigenous girls and women. And so I see part of my role now is, even though here I am talking away, is stepping to the side and supporting her in sharing her voice where there isn't this in between. So those are some of my thoughts.
Shelley and Trent, do you have anything to say? Sorry, you two have been very quiet.
Yeah, well, I won't weigh in on what was just said, but I think that that's, yeah, like a huge issue with how Indigenous voices are represented in lots of parts of Canada. People are not careful about how they curate things, which is leads to like harms like this. But I was more thinking about, I guess, as an author, kind of like material barriers to actually getting the work done of writing stories. And it's just become so much harder for writers coming up with cost of living, granting, like even with publishing companies, like there's less small publishers being funded now, which is a huge issue in Canadian publishing because those are the often the places where people would have the opportunity to be published in Canada if they come from like diverse backgrounds. But yeah, just like having the time to write is such a luxury. I don't know many writers who haven't like been burnt out over the past few years from organizing because of the injustices happening across the world, who like don't have other things going on in their lives, like medical expenses, full-time jobs. Like I don't know any authors who are just full-time writers, and that is something that people were able to do in the past, mostly white people, and today still mostly white people. So finding ways for us to have access to the time, the space, and the money to do our work and do our work well and not be rushed is like something that I've really been thinking about a lot. And that extends to publishing as well, which is an area that I've worked in before. And now I don't because I couldn't afford to work in publishing. Amongst many other issues with diversity in publishing. So, yeah, those are kind of my thoughts is like, give us money, give us time, give us opportunities.
Thank you. Okay, this is the last round of questions, then we have to open it up to our
Yeah.
audience. So looking ahead, how can storytelling empower youth, women, and gender diverse readers? Okay, Shelley, you have to answer this one.
Yeah, I was actually going to respond to the previous question, but can you repeat that? Sorry.
Okay, so looking forward, like into the future, how can storytelling empower youth, women, and gender diverse readers?
I mean, I think just being able to see yourself in books is empowering. I know for me, growing up, and I live in the States, and I'm traditionally published here in the States. So I don't know if it might be a little bit different than in Canada, but in here there was literally no black queer representation in young adult books. Um, Growing up when I was a teen, reading, and I think the first time I did see queer representation in a book, which is actually a book from my publisher, which is weird, to say, it was written by a white cishet author that was not queer. So I think we kind of see, which people were talking about earlier, the trajectory of um, storytelling going from people that are allies and supporters and want to give voice to those underrepresented people to actually being able to have authors tell their own stories, people actually living those experiences, um, being able to write and publish those types of stories. So I think that itself, that trajectory is um, just very important to highlight. And having young readers, particularly children and teens, be able to see themselves in books is so empowering because it shows them that, you know, I'm not alone. I can be the main character of my own story. I can have love, I can have adventure, I can have, all of these different types of uplifting experiences. And it's very validating. So that's what I'll say.
Thank you. So can we get a couple more comments, and then we're going to move on to questions from the audience.
And yeah, I have one if nobody else does. Just quickly, because the last two comments have been so on the money and so important. And I, I want to talk about a model that we've embraced at ANIC, and I'm not doing that as an ad because many people have embraced this model, and it's hopeful because we've wrestled a lot with how do you elevate marginalized voices? How do you bring people into publishing, recognizing all the problems that Trina identified, and you know, allow them to express themselves, to use their voice. So we established a paid mentorship program designed to support writers from groups historically excluded from children's book publishing in North America. All the groups, the LGBTQ, Black writers, Indigenous, writers of color, writers with living with disabilities. So the program pays mentees to work with one of Annick's in-house editors to develop that person's idea with a view to potential publication. But that's not really the point. It's just to bring them along, to work with a professional, and the mentees receive $1,000 bursary for a 3-month mentorship program. And we've had hundreds and hundreds of applications, which is encouraging and also discouraging because we can only deal with so many of them. But we did write a response to everyone who was selected. A number have gone on to get published, including 11 with us. So I just wanted to throw that as the model of the publishing industry trying to respond and trying to recognize these really difficult issues. And I also just quickly have to add, I am shocked that anyone would publish a book on an Indigenous theme by a non-Indigenous writer. That is should so not be done. And those books need to be placed somewhere else. But I know it doesn't always happen.
Anyone else who would like to share with regards to the future?
I have just a really quick thought. I think it fits in here. Just the books that we covered in the book club at the center. Some of them, they all dealt with young people from very diverse situations and very diverse backgrounds. Some of them told really difficult, really challenging stories. And some of them, I'm thinking particular, Estee, in terms of your book, some of them were very uplifting stories. And some of them were stories of young people, yes, facing challenges, but having good lives too. And I just think both approaches are really important. Both, and that young people can see themselves both in the stories that are really hard, and they can see themselves in the stories where young people are building good lives for themselves. And we shouldn't ever try to filter out and go in one direction or the other, not as writers, not as publishers, not as librarians, teachers. We have to appreciate that whole spectrum of stories and the value that they all have.
Yeah, and I just wanted to repeat what Christine said in her intro, where she said, "See, imagine, and believe is possible," because I think that is when you see yourself as being worthy of having a dignified life, a happy, dignified life. Like Barb, you mentioned these stories of including joy and including characters living their full authentic lives, then you feel like you belong in that future as well.
Thank you. Any closing remarks from any other authors and panelists? No? Okay, so then we'll go into from the participants. So if you can please send your questions in and to your to one of the panelists, or a general question, please do so. And I want to give a shout out to the teachers that are attending and brought their students. Thank you very much. You have to let me know who you are so I can send you some books.
I'll start with sort of the first question that we had in the chat was, what can readers, particularly those who are not professionals, do to support the work or counter book bans?
I can take this one because I was actually on a panel about this earlier this year. But I had one person suggested just requesting the books from your library does such a big it creates such a big impact. The more people that request the book, the more that libraries see that these books are wanted and that the publisher sees and that those requests go through. That is one huge way that you can help and that you can um, uh, uh, counteract these book bans is by partnering with your local library.
I'm going
Great,
to add
thank
to
you.
that about libraries. I know like there's a few like independent libraries that have started to emerge in Canada, like specifically from the trans communities in Montreal and Toronto, because there's often books that are not in circulation in libraries that are maybe available like within the community. So if your community is experiencing like a lot of book banning, you should first fight that and make sure that your public libraries have your support, but then also circulating your books within your community yourself and making that public and making that accessible to the people who want to find it is another good way of dealing with that issue.
That is actually a really important point. And in my community, we had a real lack of books around queer and trans families, and so we applied for a grant and put $5,000 worth of books in little free libraries all over our city. And so, like, those are the kinds of things that I think can also be helpful. Yeah. Um, Raquel, I'm just wondering if your students want to ask their questions themselves or if they just want us to ask. I'll maybe start with the first question. So from a grade 11 class, um,
So I think, sorry, it took me a while to get the mic out. It's
okay.
Leanne. Do you want to? You can say it nice and loud. Hey gang. I just wanted to ask when it comes to first of all, you guys like spoke really well spoken. Like it was really cool. I sat here watching the entire time. But when it comes to allyship, what do you do or what steps do you take to ensure that you're not accidentally speaking over the minority voice or accidentally silencing them with how loud your allyship is? Oh, thank you. Oh my God, thank you. Stop.
That's such a great question. That's fantastic. I won't answer this, but I just want to say thank you for that.
Okay, who's going to answer this question? Okay, I'll go. I'll just answer this briefly. I'm mixed race, and I I've had a very difficult life growing up because we were one of the few mixed race kids in our school, and I would have died to have had an ally growing up. And I think what you can do is be supportive in making sure that their voice gets heard and they get seen, without speaking for them, right? And that's really important, that encourage that person to speak up if they can or if they want to, but there's different ways and different forms to speak up, and just being there and being in a supporting role and not speaking for that person or for that group is very important. So that's just my take on it. Somebody might have a different one.
I also wanted to say that to take the word um, the voiceless out of circulation, because a lot of times you see they are the voice for the voiceless, but there's no community and no people that are voiceless. They have voices. They just haven't been given the opportunity, the mic, so that would be a good allyship, is stepping away from being the voice of the voiceless and saying, no, they have a voice. And
I think it's important also to listen. I think that a lot of times people kind of aggressively speak up, but they don't listen to what people actually have to say, people in the communities actually have to say. So I think it's really important to practice that as well.
I agree with
Sorry, go ahead, Barb.
I agree with what everybody said. But what I think is there's a spectrum of ways not to speak over top of somebody. And so I had to think about you, Maggie, when hearing this question. Your sister is dead. And so really, you are the only conduit left for her voice. That's so often not the case. When it is, you have to be the voice. When somebody else is still there, and as you say, has their voice, then you find a way to give them a conduit for their voice. And so it's so different each time. There's no simple way other than being in community and being in communion with whoever needs to be talking about what's going on in their lives, and working together to see the best way to bring that voice forward.
Absolutely. All right, I'm sorry. We do have to start to wrap up because we're very quickly running out of time, but I did want to say that this was just such an amazing conversation, and I've really appreciated the opportunity to be amongst all of you. I feel like we need to have a lot more of these types of conversations, and we likely will for the next few years at least. Um, and I just want to sort of end by saying we're going to put a little survey in the chat. If you could please fill it out, that would be really great. That's how we sort of prove that we do this work and that we have a need for funding around the ability to do this type of work. Um, and then sort of, I just wanted to say, like, I think that the part that often gets lost when we're talking about things like banning books and, gatekeeping and all of those kinds of things is that through literature, we can amplify diverse perspectives, challenge erasure, and build more inclusive and or equitable literary landscapes. And that's why this conversation is so important. We're committed to seeing, hearing, and lifting every voice, so that every reader can find themselves reflected in the pages they hold close to their hearts. So I just want to say thank you to our guests, authors, publishers, librarians, and book club creators. Thank you for sharing your work and your ongoing dedication to ensuring representation in the books that we read. And to everyone attending today, thank you for listening, reflecting, and supporting the voices that need to be heard. Your presence helps makes this community stronger and more inclusive. Tanya, do you have any final words?
Yes, for all the students and for everyone attending, whoever needs to hear this, just remember you matter. You matter. You're valued, and you are loved, no matter what you're going through. And just hold that in your heart and always keep that with you, especially during all the challenging times when people question who you are. So please always remember that.
All right. Thank you very much, everyone.